Next, we'll move to our second presentation, and it's by Dr. Matt Poore. Dr. Poore is a professor of animal science and beef extension specialist at North Carolina State University. He directs the Amazing Grazing program and provides leadership to the NC State Extension Animal Agriculture Program team. He has 32 years experience doing applied research and extension work across the state of North Carolina. His major program areas are use of alternative feeds, forage and forage management approaches for beef cattle. Dr. Poore is the chair of the Alliance of Grassland Renewal, a national group focused on improving the understanding of and achieving the adoption of novel endophyte tall fescue technology. So tonight, Dr. Poore is going to talk with us a little bit about pasture evaluation and maybe which could lead to pasture renovation, Dr. Poore. So I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, Johnny, thank you. And welcome everybody back here. Let me see if I can get this slideshow started. Okay, so thanks everybody, and glad to have a good group on again tonight. And we're real excited to bring this information to a lot of people and to be able to use this in the future. So tonight, my topic is basically this idea of how do you evaluate and decide if you're going to renovate your pastures. We have a lot of interest in this, and so I'm going to run through some of the basic considerations for that can help get you started anyway on thinking about that topic. So the start is, so really, why are you renovating pastures? I mean, why is that something that you want to do? And we basically have two situations that are most common. First is I want to change my forage crop from what's there to something presumably better, more productive, or whatever. And so some examples of that would be if you want to convert some toxic tall fescue pasture to this novel endophyte tall fescue. That's a very non-toxic and a very good forage, a good way to go if you're in the fescue belt. Or maybe you want to add more warm season to your system and plant native warm season grasses. But a lot of times we're basically working with something that's not as good as we'd like, and we want to change to one of these upgraded forage types to get better performance on our animals or maybe more yield. Second reason may be because you do have old pastures that need help. And this is real common around the area. A lot of older pastures have been basically planted in Kentucky 31 tall fescue, which is the toxic one, many years ago, the 50s and 60s. A lot of pastures were planted and have never been renovated. So if you have pastures like that, there's really sometimes a pretty low level of desirable stuff out there, a lot of undesirables, and maybe some other problems like old erosion or heavy use areas or whatever that need to be done something with. And so those are the two major reasons why. But the question you really need to ask yourself as you think about that is, why do they need renovation? Even these older pastures, if they've been taken really good care of and managed, they're pretty darn productive, and you might be very happy with them. So maybe it's your management or whatever that led you to that situation. Maybe you quit fertilizing and lost your fescue or something like that. So the question is, you need to ask yourself, why is this situation? And then, am I willing to change that? So if you're, for example, if you planted novel endophyte tall fescue 10 years ago and you didn't manage it well, and the stand is thinning, then it doesn't make sense to renovate it back to that same grass if you're not going to change your management and try to keep that stand for longer. So just go through that, be honest with yourself, and realize that it's an opportunity to upgrade your management, because once you really plant that upgraded forage, then you're going to want to take care of it. So it may be that helps you to go ahead and become a better manager. Now, there's a lot of systems out there for assessing pastures, and I'm going to just give you the one that we think is probably the most broadly applicable and easy to use, and that is called the NRCS Pasture Condition Scoring System. And this system takes into account a lot of different critical factors out there on your pasture that you determine from walking the pasture and really making some observations. There's a very well-developed worksheet and a guide to go with it that you can download off the web. So all you have to do is search for NRCS pasture condition score, and you'll find both that worksheet and that guide. And you can download that and have that as you go out, and you'll learn a lot about this. It's a great way for you to keep track of any improvements you make in your pasture. So if you're new, or maybe you're just becoming aware of your need to improve your farm, getting a good pasture condition scoring now on all those pastures will help you to track that. And the total score gives you kind of a general guideline for you do need a lot of help or just a little help. And then the specific scores on the different factors help you to focus those efforts into areas that you think you can probably improve. So it's very useful. And actually, a lot of our NRCS and soil and water people have been trained on that, and the extension agents really across the country, if they've not had specific training, they still can figure it out. It's a very common sense kind of thing. Now, pretty big list here. The factors that you need to think about as you go out and do that pasture condition scoring. These are the things that are on the worksheet. So you're guided through each of these, and you give it a score of 1 to 5. And some major things like what's the percent desirable plants, what's the percent legume, and then what's the percent live cover, and along with that, how much bare ground. I mean, that's basically what you're observing there. A low score means you got a lot of bare ground that doesn't have live plants. Something about pasture diversity. How diverse are the plants out there? Is there dead tissue residue that's at a healthy level in the system for the organisms to use, and that sort of thing? Evidence of grazing management. Is it being overgrazed? Has it been undergrazed? Those kinds of things. Livestock concentration areas, like Deidre talked about, where animals have been fed hay or whatever. Are we taking care of those properly and using them for their nutrients as we should be? And then spreading them out, basically. And then how vigorous are the plants? Now, we also do some things about soil in that scoring. And again, we're going to have a lot about soils in the second half tonight. But basically, we're going to write down whether we find compaction. So you're going to have some kind of a tool with you, maybe a shovel or a soil probe. Healthy roots. We're going to look for the color of the soil, and we're going to look for evidence of biological activity. And then we're also going to look for erosion. Evidence of sheet and rill erosion, wind erosion, the stability of the stream banks. Are they being degraded by cattle being on them? And then the presence of things like gullies. So all of these traits are then summed up to give you that overall pasture condition score. Now that all sounds easy, and it is once you've done a lot of it and you're familiar with it. But we have a real problem getting out there and deciding this: how many desirable plants and what kind of plants are out there. And there are different ways that are used both in research and in regular farm monitoring. And you can put out a transect line and go back to the same spot across the pasture and look at what plant is in each point. You do that with like a tape measure. A lot of that's done by NRCS. There's a system called the dry weight rank method, where you throw a frame and you assess the top 3 species in that. That's also used a lot by NRCS. Now, what we like is called the step point system, where the pasture is randomly walked, and you have a little location on the tip of your boot that you watch, and you write down the species that hits your boot. And you want to have 100 to 200 or 300 locations where you determine what plant is there, and that data will help you to assess the overall pasture botanical composition. So the advantages, there's some real advantages that we like to do. Anyone can do it. It's very simple to understand and to do. You don't really need any equipment. It's a great educational tool because we all can learn the plants better, and going with your advisor and walking out across your pastures and learning the plants and identifying how many desirable and undesirable, that's really beneficial. The data is easy to summarize. It gives you information about all the plants in the field, not just the major ones. So if there's some little weed that's just out there at a real low rate that you want to know about, you'll find it. And then the other observations about those pasture condition indicators that I talked about before can be made during that walk. So you can be looking for erosion and all those sorts of things. And you basically cover the whole pasture like you were taking a soil sample, and just you're making observations about the plants that are there at that particular location at the tip of your boot. So here's how you do it. And again, a lot, we do have a handout on the website, actually the beef extension website that goes over this. But basically we want to identify the field in question and do a preliminary assessment. Is this a fescue pasture, Bermuda grass? It's good to know some of those generalities about it. Carry a clipboard with you and a worksheet to write the data on. Bring 2 pens, because I always drop one, and April always brings an extra one for me because I can drop 2 at times. But we make a mark on the tip of the boot so that you know exactly where that forage is hitting. And then you walk the field and stop every 10 to 30 steps, kind of depending on how big the pasture is, and identify the plant that your mark is touching. Or if it's bare ground, you write that down. A couple hundred points is a good number to shoot for, and be observant and make those notes and look for things like, are there out of season weeds? Are there the little yellow tomatoes that indicate horse nettle might be there, that sort of thing, and look for signs of erosion and other stuff like that. This is one of our former students doing it in a fescue pasture. And you can see she's probably got fescue on her boot there, but we were looking to try to measure the persistence of this fescue, and that pasture's been there for 8 years, and there's a lot of tall fescue still there holding in. It looks like a good stand. Now, the devil of it is you have to be able to identify the plants, and so especially if we're in a situation where it's been overgrazed or something like that. It's not that easy, but we do need to be able to identify weeds, the desirable plants. That's a Dallas grass plant. Doesn't look much different than that plantain, but it's definitely a desirable one. And then obviously the bare ground is pretty self-explanatory. Now, as far as a worksheet, this is again NCSU Beef Extension Portal has a copy of this worksheet and a little explanation on how to use it. But basically we're going to have our field ID, and then we're just going to make our species across the top here, going to date it, put our name or initials on it, and then we're going to go across here and use little cross hatches to as we walk the pasture. So here's one that's been out, and again, we're walking where this is actually 100 points made just to make it easy for you to understand. But basically we had 34 hits on tall fescue, 3 orchard grass, 9 white clover, about 17 on buttercups, some other desirable plants out there, some other undesirable plants, and then a lot of bare ground. 29% of the points is bare ground. Now we'll come back to that and talk about what that might mean. But the point being here, since we've got 100, it's pretty easy to see that this is percentages. And so 29% bare ground is a lot of bare ground for a pasture. We've also made a note here that this pasture shows that it had a lot of horse nettle and dog fennel back during the summertime, and this was done in the winter. We obviously were looking at buttercups out there. So again, some notes so that you can go back and keep track of what's going on in that pasture and other parts of the year. Now, the problem with a lot of people with this particular technique is you have to know your plants. And so I just want to encourage you, if you don't know the plants, is start learning them. There's a lot of good texts out there. Southern Forages is a particularly good one, but we should know the major species, the significant grasses, legumes, and weeds that are on your farm. Probably every one of you has at least 10 or 12 that take up a very large percentage of the total out there, so you should know those. Our area, orchard grass, fescue, bluegrass, Bermuda grass, Dallas grass, all those are things that you should identify and be able to tell what they are. Now, there's a lot of minor species. I think we've got hundreds of species on our farm. I don't know what they all are, but I can usually tell If it's a grass or a broadleaf, and that has some implications if you're going to use herbicides and stuff. And it's also it's pretty easy to tell if they're desirable or undesirable. So if you don't know, you can just have a category that says undesirable and just mark it down there and don't worry too much about it. But we do need to continue to try to learn all the plants, and certainly any poisonous plants that are in our area, we need to be able to identify those. And it's easy to say, if you value diversity of your pastures, which many of our farmers do, and if you want a lot of legumes, you're going to have to tolerate what we call weeds. That if you're going to have a high legume stand, you're going to have a few weeds. Certainly, good forages are the best weed control we could have, and forage management will help keep it that way. But again, we encourage legumes and diversity, and that means that not everything we call weeds probably actually are weeds. So we need to understand these weeds that we have. Are they toxic? Will cattle eat them? And then what is the economic threshold? I mean, do we have so many that they're a problem, or do we just have a few out there? And I'll just tell you, there's a lot to learn about weed ecology. We're always trying to understand this, but we've got farms that have almost no weeds that have not used herbicides in a long time, and we have farms that use herbicides all the time that are covered up in weeds. So it's not as easy a topic as you might think, and always some room there for some improvement. Now, there are a lot of well, let me rephrase that. There are a few plants that we know are very poisonous. And so we need to be thinking about those highly toxic ones like poisonous hemlock, wild cherry, perilla mint. Those kill animals, and we know that they are a problem. So if you got those around, you should really know what they look like and do what you can to protect yourself against them. There's a lot of others like hemp dogbane, horse nettle, buttercups, those that I've mentioned, that there's just very few cases where we ever see poisoning. They are on the list of poisonous plants, but they just don't seem to be as poisonous as some of these others. So we need to be able to differentiate between those, and we can live with some of those those that are not very poisonous. Those real poisonous ones, we have to take some drastic measures sometimes to control them. And just some of my grazing experience, if you start mobbing up cows and moving them around quick, and making them eat a little less selectively, they will eat stuff that they won't normally eat if they're just nosing around a pasture. This is hemp dogbane. Before that was horse nettle. I'm going to go back to it. Horse nettle, hemp dogbane. Again, one of the ones that's supposed to be pretty poisonous, but animals are known to eat this quite readily, and does not seem to be a big problem, even when it's at this kind of level. So to learn more about that, as I said, there's a lot of sources, but I will direct you to this Pastureland Plants page on the Amazing Grazing website. So if you'll go to that website and look for up on the in the middle on the right-hand side, it says Pastureland Plants. You'll get to this page, and there's a list of about 30 some plants that we have some real good descriptions and pictures and stuff, and they are most of the major pasture plants in the region. And so that's a real good resource that you can go ahead and go to. Now, one thing when you start looking at those plants and what you found out there in the pasture, we need to be understanding that there are what we call indicator plants. And so some of these plants are going to give you a really good idea of, well, something's going on here to cause this problem. So if you have some real short, what we call Dutch style white clover, maybe 3 or 4 inches tall at the most. If you have annual bluegrass, which is this little short bluegrass, poana people call it, makes a seed head when it's only about 2 inches tall, or if you have a lot of chickweed in your pastures, these are indications of overgrazing. And so, you can, especially if you're an advisor or it's a new farm and you're just learning it, you'll find that. Other indicators indicate compacted soils are goosegrass, horse nettles here in these two photos, quackgrass, knotweed. All of those are indications of compaction. And so we have some things that will help us to indicate what kind of problems we may have out there on the pasture. Now, as we think about renovation, it's a very broad category. And so we either can do partial renovation or total renovation. And So I'm going to start with partial here because this is probably what a lot of us need. So if you do your pasture walk and you find that you have mostly desirable plants, maybe just a few undesirable ones, that sort of thing, you probably can fix that without tearing the whole thing up or killing the stand. So we want to rejuvenate and enhance that pasture. Basically, we find these pastures, a lot of our pastures now are in pretty poor shape because of bad weather conditions we've had over the last few years, and they could definitely come back without being completely killed and replanted. But what we need to do is we need to look at the fertility, we need to soil sample them, we need to understand the weeds that are out there, and if we have a weed problem, we can use some herbicides as a tool to just to get them under control. And we don't like to use a lot of herbicides, but certainly a little bit if you have a problem weed is going to be helpful. And then we may put out supplemental seed. It may be frost seeding clovers. It may be putting out crabgrass seed or even some, some thin pasture you might over drill. And then we also want to rest it and relieve the grazing pressure for a while so that it can recover. And again, a lot of folks, that's all we need to do. We do have many farms are overstocked. We need to review our stocking rate and make sure that we don't have too many animals for the land base that we have. Now drop down to total renovation. And this is where we kind of go through the whole thing. So we're going to take soil samples. We're going to correct the fertility by adding that out there. If you are going to do tillage, some people will do tillage to smooth out old holes and that sort of thing in the pasture, rough spots. I'm not a big fan of tillage in our area, but sometimes it's much more practical. So, tillage is not off the table by any means, but we need to plow, we need to disc in lime and fertilizer if we have that opportunity. We need to address any grazing management issues that we might have had that led to that. I mentioned that before, but it's very important if you're going to spend a lot of money on these overall renovations. We want to kill the existing plants either with glyphosate or Roundup or with tillage, and make sure that we get them completely killed. The other thing I'll mention is that we oftentimes use a summer smother crop in a lot of our pasture renovations, and this is to prevent new plants from coming up. And it's very important whether you're doing fescue pasture or any other kind of pasture renovation that you control the seed production this time of year, not just of the fescue or the crop that's out there, but also the weeds and stuff. Try not to let there be much seed production because that will help you as you replant. And then finally, we're going to reestablish a desirable warm or cool season perennial grass to help improve the productivity of the farm. If you're from fescue country, like we are here, obviously there's a lot of benefits, but a lot of costs of renovating those fescue pastures. But basically you have costs of spraying, planting, the smother crop, planting the novel fescue, and then the opportunity cost or the lost forage production, which I want to make sure we make that point. You've got to do something about that. But this is going to benefit us in improved weaning weights, improved breeding rates, and reduced extra input costs that we incur because of fescue. So while all pasture renovation is costly, if we do it right and we relieve something like the toxic fescue problem, it can be very good for our overall financial bottom line. Couple of examples. This is a pasture that was established in 2000. This particular shot is a place where it's in pretty good shape. It's actually max Q tall fescue, and it checked out 70% max Q and 30% crabgrass. And so that crabgrass was a real problem, and in places it had pretty well taken over. And there's a little bit more to that story because it has vetch in those spots during the wintertime. And so those two plants had really worked on the fescue stand. So this was a case where we had enough desirable plants that we just went ahead and drilled in more novel endophyte tall fescue. Again, we don't have to worry about killing the toxic stuff. We just supplement that with over drilling. So this is something that is very viable, and it really worked on this pasture to get it into a lot better shape. Another scene of a different pasture. This one, if you step it off with that cover on it before it was bush hogged, you'd think it was terrible. But once you've bush hogged it, as in the foreground here, and you've let it come out, you can see there's a lot of fescue, a lot of desirable grass here. basically this needs fertility and grazing management and can definitely come back. Does not have to be renovated again unless we want to get rid of that toxic tall fescue to improve our performance. Now, if you're buying property or whatever and looking at it, or heavens, for hopefully your pastures don't look like this, but if they do, these are real pastures. These probably could use a complete renovation and then would become very productive. And just a word of advice: if you've got a new farm, it's always a good idea to do that before you get the livestock there. Now I'm going to jump back to this hatch mark and kind of get you thinking as we close out here. We've got this pasture where we found that we've got about half desirable species. We've got some weeds and we've got some bare ground. It's a very borderline case. Because of the bare ground, we might think overgrazing is an issue. There's not enough clover really in here. You see there's a little bit of clover, but probably not enough to where we don't want to where we take the herbicides off the table. We might want to spray that. So I would say weed control, fertility and rest, or you could do a complete renovation if you wanted to. It's kind of this one, you could go either way. Certainly we need to spray to control that buttercup, or wait and spray it in the spring. And then of course the full renovation will do a lot more than that. Okay, we had this question last week, and so I thought I'd throw it in, and I am about a couple minutes from being done, Johnny. So how do you replace that missing forage during renovation? Here's some ideas that you can do. We need to keep in mind that when we knock out one of the pastures, or let's just say we're going to do partial renovation, we want to rest it, we're going to have to get that forage we would have grown from somewhere else. And so that's a problem. So if we have a new farm, renovating those pastures before we stock it up with cattle, that or other livestock, that's really an important thing. We want to possibly reduce livestock numbers temporarily to allow for that renovation. Maybe we can send some cows or calves or something out on contract grazing, get them off our farm for a while. We could purchase hay or other feeds to supplement them. We could use a smother crop in the renovation process, and that actually generates a lot of feed because those are really highly, get a lot of yield out of those. Or we could also increase the production on our other acres. We could use a little more fertilizer, or maybe some better forage management that would generally result in more forage production. So with that, I want to encourage you to get out and assess your pastures. It's that time of year. It's a wonderful thing to go out and do. Work through that pasture condition score analysis, either with your NRCS, soil, water, or extension agent, or do it by yourself, or do it with your friends, or do it with your kids. Be able to identify those major plant species, be able to categorize the unknowns or as undesirable or desirable, kind of learn a little bit about how to do that, do a step point analysis on those pastures, and then come up with your plan. And don't try to do it all at one time, do it a little bit at a time and move it all in the right direction. Okay, with that, Johnny, I'm done, and appreciate the time.
Thank you, Dr. Poor. I think that's some great information. I'll echo what he said. Go out and get in your pastures, get to know your plants. And I think one of the best parts of that maybe left out was that when you walk around out in your pasture with a clipboard, it gives the neighbors something to talk about. So you will be the talk of the coffee shop for sure. So
that's right. Hey,
yeah,
Johnny, I'll just mention too, before I jump off, we are going to have the plant collection will be out at the workshops across the state. So we'll be carrying that around all summer. So if you see a workshop in your area, come and we'll try to teach you some about these plants. We've got a really nice collection.
Sounds good. Well, we're at halftime, I guess, through our workshop and our webinar this evening. So the next two speakers are going to talk with us about soil health. So if you're a soil health junkie like I am, just take a deep seat. You're really going to have a lot of fun here over the next hour.